All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a maritime mystery. That's as chilling as it is perplexing. The ghost ship, the SS Ourang Medan.
Ghost ship is right. We're talking a vessel allegedly found with every single soul on board dead. Dead under some truly bizarre and unexplained circumstances.
Unexplained is putting it mildly, and what makes the story so fascinating, so compelling, is that it blends these incredibly vivid, almost theatrical details with a real lack of hard facts.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. The story first popped up in the 1940s. And since then, it's been retold, reinterpreted, and, let's be honest, probably embellished over the years. So it's a gripping mystery for sure. But it's also one built on some pretty shaky ground.
Right. So how do we approach this? Well, for those of you who, like me, like to get to the heart of a matter quickly but thoroughly, our mission today is to dissect the story of the Ourang Medan. What evidence is there, if any, that this ship even existed? And if it did, what are the most plausible explanations for the truly strange events that supposedly happened on board? We'll be looking at the inconsistencies, the gaps in the story, and we'll try to understand why this particular nautical ghost story continues to grab our attention.
A ghost story for the ages.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Those initial SOS messages, the ones that sent chills down spines and set this whole mystery in motion.
Well, first whispers of the Ourang Medan emerged around 1940. And we see reports popping up in British newspapers like the Daily Mirror and the Yorkshire Evening Post. Now, this early version of the story places the ship south of the Solomon Islands.
South of the Solomon Islands. Got it.
And the SOS, the message itself, is pretty chilling. It starts with a plea. SOS from the steamship Ourang Medan. Big ships with shortwave wireless get touch, doctor. Urgent. So, clearly a medical emergency. But then it gets really dark, really fast. The message continues. Probable second officer dead. Other members' crew also killed. Disregard medical consultation. SOS, urgent assistance warship.
Wow.
Yeah, it paints a bleak picture, right? And then it ends. Abruptly, with an incomplete message. Crew has, just like that, it cuts off, leaving us hanging.
And that's unsettling enough. But now, the plot thickens. Fast forward to 1948. The Ourang Medan reappears. And the story takes on a slightly different, arguably more dramatic feel.
Yeah, this time we're looking at an account published in the Dutch-Indonesian newspaper De Locomotief.
Okay.
And one of the big changes? The location. We're no longer in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
This version puts the Ourang Medan in the Straits of Malacca.
So a completely different part of the world.
Exactly. And the SOS, that changes too. It's much more detailed. It reads, and I'm quoting here, SOS from Ourang Medan, we float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead. And then a series of incoherent dots and dashes. Almost like someone's desperately trying to signal. And then finally the last chilling words, I die.
Okay, so two different versions of the SOS, different locations, different details. It already makes you wonder, right? About the reliability of the sources. Why would the story change so much?
Exactly. It raises red flags from the get-go. But despite the differences, both versions of the story agree on one thing, the gruesome discovery.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the ship itself. In the 1940 account, the Ourang Medan is found listing in the water.
Suggesting a ship in distress. Makes sense.
Totally. But the 1948 version, which tells the story of the American ship, the Silver Star, finding the Ourang Medan, it describes the ship as seemingly undamaged.
Right. No visible damage. And that's a big discrepancy. How could a ship sending out such a frantic SOS, a message clearly indicating that something was terribly wrong, how could it be found intact?
Yeah, it doesn't add up. But regardless of the condition of the ship, the state of the crew, that's consistently described as absolutely horrifying, eyes wide open, faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror, mouths agape, their bodies just sprawled out on their backs.
And no signs of injury. No wounds, no blood. Nothing.
It's like a scene from a horror movie. And then, to make things even creepier, the 1948 account throws in the detail of a dead dog found among the bodies.
Right, adding another layer of mystery to an already bizarre situation.
And it's interesting how the descriptions of the bodies, they remain pretty consistent across the different versions of the story. This image of a crew frozen in a moment of terror, that really seems to be what sticks with people. But then, when we get to the ship's actual demise, how it sank, the stories diverge again.
Yeah. The 1940 version tells us that the rescuers, they board the ship, start investigating, but then they hear explosions, and they're forced to abandon ship before the Ourang Medan bursts into flames and sinks. A pretty dramatic end.
Dramatic, yeah. But then the 1948 account gives us a slightly different and perhaps more disturbing ending.
Right. So in this version, the Silver Star, They're prepping to tow the Ourang Medan.
Okay.
But then a fire breaks out. In cargo hold number 4, they're forced to evacuate. And shortly after, the ship explodes and sinks. The added detail of the fire starting in a specific cargo hold, that's interesting. Maybe it hints at something about the cargo itself, what was being carried.
It does, but here's the thing. Here's where this mystery really takes a deep dive into the unknown.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Despite these very detailed and frankly terrifying accounts, researchers have been unable to find any official registration records for a ship named Ourang Medan. Nope. No record of it in any of the national shipping registries, not even in the Dutch records, which you'd expect if the ship was indeed Dutch, as the story suggests. And even Lloyd's shipping register, this massive international database of ships, nothing. It's like the Ourang Medan never existed on paper. And that's a huge red flag.
Huge. I mean, ship registries are kind of a big deal in the maritime world. They're essential for accountability.
Right.
So the fact that there's no record of the Ourang Medan anywhere, that really throws the whole story into question.
Big time. And you combine that with the inconsistencies we've already talked about. The changing locations, the different SOS messages, the variations in the details. It really starts to look like a narrative that's evolved over time. Maybe it's not rooted in a real event at all.
Or maybe it's been exaggerated, blown out of proportion.
Exactly. So if there's no real proof that the ship existed, where did this story come from? How did it take hold?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Well, let's explore some of the theories that have been put forward to explain what might have happened.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. The first theory is pretty dramatic. Unsecured, hazardous material.
Ah, yes. The classic dangerous cargo theory.
So the idea here is that the Ourang Medan was involved in something shady, maybe smuggling, maybe carrying illegal cargo.
Like what?
Well, we're talking dangerous chemicals, things like potassium cyanide, nitroglycerin.
Wow, that's some seriously dangerous stuff.
It is. Some people even speculate that the ship might have been carrying wartime nerve agents. The theory goes that seawater somehow got into the cargo hold, and that triggered a reaction with these chemicals, releasing toxic gases. And that would explain why the crew died so suddenly, and seemingly without any physical injuries.
That's a good point. No signs of struggle, no outward injuries. It does fit.
Right. And what about the fire and the explosion?
Well, in the case of something like nitroglycerin, contact with water or even just a change in temperature, that can trigger a violent reaction, an explosion. So the fire could have been a result of the chemical reactions, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe a fire started first and then the heat caused the chemicals to react and explode.
Okay, so either way, a pretty volatile situation.
Very volatile. And there's another detail that adds fuel to this theory.
Oh.
Yeah. One version of the story mentions a dying German survivor.
A survivor?
Yeah, found on Taehongi Atoll. That's in the Marshall Islands. And he claimed that the ship was carrying oil of vitriol. That's an old term for sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid, that's nasty stuff.
It is. Highly corrosive. And he said that they were sailing from a small Chinese port to Costa Rica, deliberately avoiding authorities.
Okay, so that definitely adds a layer of intrigue. Smuggling, avoiding authorities. It would explain why there are no official records of the ship.
It would. It would also explain why they might be carrying such dangerous cargo in the first place, if they were trying to fly into the radar.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But there is another theory out there. A bit more down to earth, perhaps, but still potentially deadly. Carbon monoxide poisoning.
Ah, yes. The silent killer.
Exactly. So this theory suggests that there was an undetected fire smoldering somewhere on board, maybe in the cargo hold, maybe it was a boiler malfunction, but whatever the cause, it released carbon monoxide.
Which is odorless and colorless.
Exactly, and deadly. So the crew, they wouldn't have known what hit them. They would have been overcome by the gas, incapacitated, and eventually they would die. And again, no signs of struggle, no visible injuries. It fits the picture.
It does. And then the fire, it could have eventually spread, become uncontrollable, and cause the ship to explode and sink.
So both theories offer potential explanations for what might have happened, both plausible in their own way, but neither really addresses the elephant in the room. The fact that there's no record of this ship ever existing.
Yeah, we're still left with that nagging question.
So let's go back to the story's origins. Try to trace its myths. We know it first appeared in the 1940s, but where exactly?
Well, one of the earliest documented appearances of the Ourang Medan story seems to be in an Italian newspaper called Il Piccolo. They're in a series called I Drammi del Mar, that translates to Dramas of the Sea. And this series was written by a guy named Silvio Shirley, starting in 1940.
Dramas of the Sea. That's already kind of setting the stage for a sensationalized story, right?
Right. It sounds like something you'd see on a movie poster.
Mm.
And it makes you wonder if the Ourang Medan was maybe just one of many dramatic maritime tales that Shirley was spinning.
So it starts in Italy, but then it crosses borders, right?
It does. That same year, 1940, reports of the Ourang Medan start popping up in British newspapers, papers like the Daily Mirror and the Yorkshire Evening Post. These reports, they attribute the story to the Associated Press, and they trace it back to Trieste, Italy. But here's the thing. These early British versions, they're quite different from the later versions that we're more familiar with.
Oh, how so?
Well, for starters, they place the ship near the Solomon Islands, and they don't mention the names of any rescue vessels. And the SOS messages, they're different too. So it's clear that even from the very beginning, the story wasn't a fixed thing. It was evolving, changing.
So even in its earliest form, the story was a bit of a chameleon.
Exactly. And then, in 1948, the story resurfaces in that Dutch-Indonesian newspaper, The Locomotive.
Yeah.
And this is where it really starts to take on the shape that we know today, the more detailed SOS. The dying German survivor who tells his story to a missionary, it's all there. It becomes a much more vivid, much more dramatic narrative.
And the source.
Silvio Shirley. Again, the same guy who wrote those early Italian articles.
So he's the one who really seems to have shaped the Ourang Medan legend as we know it.
He's a key figure, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But what's also interesting is that even the Dutch newspaper that published this more elaborate version of the story, they seem to have some doubts about its authenticity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They even included a disclaimer at the end of their series, essentially saying that they had no other information about this mystery of the sea and couldn't answer the many questions that the story raised. They even explicitly said that the whole thing could be a fantasy, a thrilling romance of the sea. But then they also mentioned that Shirley assured them that it was a true story.
Okay, so they're hedging their bets a little.
Exactly. They're presenting it as a captivating story, but they're also acknowledging that there's no real proof to back it up.
And the story didn't stop there, did it? It kept spreading.
It did. It appeared in an American newspaper, the Albany Times, in 1948. They cited the Dutch Elsevier's Weekly as their source, and it even made its way into a publication by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, in 1952. So the story clearly gained some traction, became part of maritime lore.
And yet, the core problem remains. No one has been able to find any hard evidence that the Ourang Medan ever existed. And even the Silver Star, the American ship that supposedly found the Ourang Medan, their logs don't mention anything about it.
It's like they sailed right past one of the biggest maritime mysteries of all time and just didn't notice.
Exactly. So we're left with a story that's as compelling as it is questionable. A true enigma wrapped in a shroud of mystery.
And that's probably why it continues to fascinate us. The inconsistencies, the lack of proof, it all just adds to the intrigue.
So let's wrap this up. What have we learned about the SS Ourang Medan? Well, it's a story that's been told and retold for decades. A story of a ghost ship and its crew found dead under mysterious circumstances. But the evidence? It's just not there. No official records of the ship, conflicting details in the different versions of the story, and those theories we discussed, the hazardous cargo and the carbon monoxide poisoning, they're plausible, but they're ultimately speculative.
They are, because we can't even confirm the basic premise that the ship actually existed.
Right. So we're left with a question, why does this story, a story that's arguably more fiction than fact, why does it continue to hold our attention?
That's the real mystery, isn't it? I think it speaks to our fascination with the unknown, our desire to understand the unexplainable, especially when it comes to the sea. That vast, mysterious expanse. It's a place where stories like this can thrive, where the line between reality and myth can become blurred.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most enduring mysteries are the ones that may never be solved.
Exactly. And that leaves you with something to ponder. How do stories like the Ourang Medan reflect our need to make sense of the world, even when faced with ambiguity and a lack of concrete answers? What is it about these tales of the unexplained that continue to draw us in, even when we know they might be more fiction than fact?
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of the SS Ourang Medan.
Always a pleasure. Till next time.